Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cloud Lunch and Learn Ideathon, Part 2. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. We are back, and before we start, I would like to share a few things with you. So let me just share my screen. Okay, you can see my screen. So first, I would like to invite you to access our event page anytime you want, so you can get more information about the events. And also, I would like to let you know that we had to stop the live stream in the morning since we had a few problems. So we kick off a new live stream. So the link on YouTube is different in case you plan to access our events live stream via YouTube. And of course, I would like to welcome you to check this page in case you want to access details about the schedule, the rest of the schedule for the afternoon. And also, I would like to ask you to have a look to the page so you can provide us support in case you are able to do it, and it's more than welcome. So today, now I want to introduce you to Dana. Dana will be the person that basically will be moderating the sessions in the afternoon. So, hi, Dana.
Hiya. How's everyone?
All good, all good. So, do you want to introduce yourself to the community and then introduce the next session?
Let's do it. So my name is Dana. I'm American by came over to Dublin, and Hugo had very amazingly set up Cloud Lunch and Learn. So I'm very happy and excited to be here to help out because it's such a great opportunity to knowledge share with the community. And all the sessions are great, and our speakers are so knowledgeable about everything. And we have with us Sasha. And Sasha will be talking now for our afternoon session about security and compliance. Hi, Sasha.
Hola.
How are you?
I can see myself. I'm good. How are you?
Good. Do you want to introduce yourself to our viewers?
Yeah, sure. I am Sasha, and I work for Microsoft. I've been in Ireland for a couple of years. I'm originally Croatian, but I've been living here for now, I think 3-4 years already. So I'm kind of, I feel I like it. Today it's been an uncharacteristically sunny day, so that's not my favorite, but I'll survive somehow.
You're used to the weather now anyway, 3 or 4 years, like?
Yeah, I kind of like the rain and the wind and all that. So when it's gone, I'm kind of missed it. So
that's perfect. You're one of very few, I think, but that's
yeah,
great.
I know. Everybody keeps telling me, oh, they wish they were Croatia instead of Ireland, but
oh, I think that's true. If you don't mind, I think we're going to add your screen to the stream.
Yeah, go ahead. It's
So,
one of these ones.
Yes. So if everybody can just take a moment and register your interest with us. So you'll get free resources provided to us by Microsoft, and registering your interest really helps us as well, just so we can let Microsoft know that we've been doing good work and people have been attending these events. You can also scan the QR code over here to take you to the login screen. So hopefully if everyone had a chance to do that, Sasha, if you want to kick off your session.
Yeah. If we haven't been able to do this now, we'll show it at the end as well while we take questions, so you can do it then as well.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so let's kick this off, right? So this is the beautiful slide I was provided to start this, right? But I kind of like our Microsoft ones, so hopefully you don't mind as well. So today's talk is going to be all about security and compliance. But really quickly about me, because if you talk about security, usually people ask, well, what is your authority? Like, what do you know about security? So I'm a cloud solution architect currently with Microsoft, and on the infrastructure applications and development side. I also do a bit of machine learning and AI. That's not my day job, but every project can benefit from a little bit of ML or AI. So I like to stay in touch with that. Previously, I worked a lot with law enforcement, military, healthcare, finance, and banking and e-commerce sectors, right? And these are famously folks who are very concerned about security. I started as a developer, and I had other roles like project manager, team lead. Then I became an architect. I was also CTO for a couple of years, but then now I'm back to architecting. I also did, just so you can, to show that you can teach an old horse new tricks. I got my marketing degree a couple of years back because I had no degree before that. I just started working directly out of high school. But now I have a marketing degree, so that's good. I didn't want to go for any computer ones because I thought, I kind of have that in hand, so I want to try, complementing my skills. I'm also in Microsoft working with the open source champ community, and if you want to check it out, it's opensource.microsoft.com, and there's everything about open source that Microsoft is doing. And you know that Microsoft is a changed company now. They embrace open source where they haven't before, and so when I was hired, basically. I was hired on the basis of my open source skills. You can also find me on LinkedIn, so aka.ms/s/l. So /s is for Sasha and /s is for LinkedIn, and the same for /s/t if you want to find me on Twitter, or just use the handle __s. I like talking to the community, so feel free to hit me up. And just a quick intro on what is the customer success unit that I'm a part of. Well, the mission is to guide customers to get real business value from their investment with Microsoft, right? And the objective is to increase the customer satisfaction, right? But that's one of those, kind of we have to explain it, missions and objectives, right? But what I got from it is, my job is to be the voice of the customer, and it's also to remove obstacles to adoption of Azure. But on the other hand, it's also to delight with knowledge and understanding of the customer's business. And when I was hired, I was told you're joining customer success, and one of my first questions is what if something I'm supposed to advise the customer on potentially clashes with what Microsoft wants, and I was told it's customer first always. That's why we want you. So that's what customer success is all about. So let's kick off with security. We'll get to compliance in a bit. So before we begin, as you know, security is a complex topic, as is compliance, right? So it's, so potentially we might not get to everything in 1 hour. Hopefully you can forgive that. And this talk is kind of intended, if you know Microsoft levels, it's kind of level 100. It's how to think about security and compliance rather than, going hands-on and implementing it in Azure. And when I was briefed on this talk, I was told just go with food for thought. So that's what I'm gonna try and do. And because these sessions are lunch and learn, well, food, lunch, hopefully you enjoyed this. So let's begin with things you don't have to worry about, right? So if you're working with a provider, say such as Microsoft, and within the Azure cloud, there's data centers all over the world, and things you don't have to worry about are things like background checks and system checks of the people that work there. You don't have to set up your own patrols and to protect the data center and the hardware. If you ever go into one of these data centers, you can't really, because almost all of them are kind of off limits, except one of those that you can visit is the one in Dublin. There's special NDAs and things you have to go through to get that done. But it's a good experience if you ever get the chance to do this. But again, it's all about protecting the environment for Microsoft, but also all the customer data in there. We have video coverage, interacts front and back and all that. So these are the things you don't have to think about, right? So another, one of the benefits with working with somebody like Microsoft is, you can rely on that cloud, and it's built with customized hardware, and there's security controls baked into all of that. You get protections against threats such as DDoS, which you couldn't really handle in your own premises effectively, depending on the size and scale. In the bottom of the screen, sometimes you'll see these learn more links, so you can check out the information that we kind of provide to all our developers on the website. One benefit from you benefit from a team of about 3,500 global cybersecurity experts, and because Microsoft invests $1 billion and has this team of 3,500 team members, right? We focus on a lot of these security issues that you don't have to, but security is kind of a shared responsibility, so there's a lot that you need to participate with us, right? But just if you think about these numbers, right, it tells you something about, if you ask people on the street, like, is Microsoft a security company? They would, if you're asking, like members of the public, they'd say, well, I know they sell Surface hardware or something. If you ask developers, they would talk about Visual Studio. If you ask architects, they would talk about Azure, right? But we invest so much in security that, basically, if you consider any of the kind of traditional security companies, their budgets are within ranges of like 150 million to $500 million a year. Well, we invest a lot more just in security, and then you can think of us as as a security company as well. And we try to be very, very security conscious as well when discussing all the workloads that's going into our cloud from the customer perspective. So I have been watching the previous sessions because it's Saturday and I'm home alone. So I recently came back from Croatia, so I was still kind of in this 14-day mandatory quarantine, but it's ending now. So you have heard about well-architected framework if you've seen the past talks, and basically it's a set of guiding tenets that we all kind of publish and try and use ourselves to improve the quality of all the workflows. And it consists of 5 pillars. One is cost optimization, operational excellence, performance efficiency, reliability, and of course security, right? And if you want to learn more, literally just type in Azure well-architected framework and you'll get there. Or if you go to our website, docs.microsoft.com, it's a really good website. And the docs team is trying to make it like the best documentation on the planet, I guess. So what is the role of security, right? So security of kind of complex system depends on a lot of things. You have to understand the business context, right? That was also mentioned before in one of these talks. I think in the last one, just because if you're thinking about reliability and things like that, right? Well, you have to think how important is this project, who's going to access it, what are the criteria for that. It's kind of the business context. Are we fine, for example, if it's maybe it's a marketing website and it doesn't work for a day, somebody will come back tomorrow if they're interested, right? But maybe they won't, right? So then you need to kind of think, well, okay, we need to kind of make it highly available so that it's always available for our customers, right? And it's the same for security, right? If you go into the into the business context of security, you have to think about what is the data you're trying to protect, what are the processes, right? If it's just a public website where you're showcasing maybe career opportunities and things like that, well, if somebody messes that up, that might be fine because you can always revert back. There is always like brand recognition and kind of erosion with these security incidents, but it's kind of a give and take. And then also there's social context and technical context, and these are mostly about from a technical side, how you actually implement things and what services you want to use and what partners you might want to bring in. And social context is all about how are you perceived with the broader public, against all of these targets, right? And what you have to understand now that you're deploying to cloud is that none of the previous kind of paradigms work anymore, because you're now, instead of, kind of doing a network traffic analysis, which kind of isn't feasible, when you don't control everything, right? You have to kind of rely on intercepting authentication requests for the resources through identity controls, right? And sometimes the software that you already have doesn't really kind of provide you those capabilities. And then another kind of postulate that's not really for cloud security, it should be for every security, is trust but verify. And in the cases of cloud providers, you should trust and verify, right? So you should ensure the security practices, the regulatory compliance, all of that. You get regular reviews on the website. You can ask for more documentation from your account team and so forth, right? The point there is that you really need to know that you're being taken care of, right, by your cloud provider. And so some of the kind of design principles that we want you to kind of think about or take away from this session is, right, you need to align security priorities to your mission, right? So there's different things that you want to accomplish, right? And there's different security priorities to each of these, right? So if you're trying to land a rocket somewhere in the solar system, there might be different security principles than if you're running an e-commerce site, which kind of is globally available and everybody has access to it, including the bots and maybe kind of bad actors to it, right? You want to also build a comprehensive strategy, right? So if you build a security strategy that depends on a few aspects, right, then you have gaps, that will be exploited, right? Because usually you go for the weakest link, and if you neglect some of the aspects, well, hackers are very good at exploiting the weakest links. Another one is to strive towards simplicity, right? Because the more complex the system is, the more expensive and just to think about it is, right? So what you want to do is have it be simple but robust enough so that you can work for it, kind of prevent all the things that could happen for it, and to that you have to design it with attackers in mind, right? So usually when we see security, well, it's we're using all of these services in Azure, and this is the way how you protect them. Well, that's not how attackers think, right? Attackers think from the outside. So potentially there might be a black box, a system that they need to get into. Maybe it's easier to go after people instead of infrastructure. Maybe it's easy to go after partners instead of the cloud provider. So anything like that. So you have to think like the attacker and try to prevent that. And of course, because of what I've mentioned before, right, you have to leverage native controls because of the the difference of maintaining your own system in on premises with maintaining a system that's in the cloud. And one a very important principle is that you use identity as primary access control, right? So everything that interacts with each other has entities. And that doesn't mean just your users or customers or partners or your staff. It also means how your infrastructure interacts with each other, how APIs are called, how one API calls another API, and things like that, right? Another thing we always also see with a lot of our customers is, you have to have a clear ownership of responsibilities. Otherwise, when in a crisis mode, you're going to now try to discover, who is responsible for what's going on, right? So you then have to figure out and waste time doing that. And it's also important before the crisis happens, because you have to have people who are clearly responsible for aspect A of security, for aspect B, people who are responsible for reliability, who talk to the security people, and so forth, right? So it's very clear that you have that. Another, one way to kind of help with that is to embrace automation, because that allows you to kind of have clear lines of responsibility, and there are bots and things that are running in the background that are doing tasks that you just need done on a regular intervals, right? But also you could have things like AI on the back end that's working to prevent attacks as they are happening. You also need to now focus a lot more on information protection. For example, GDPR came into effect a couple of years back, and customers would come back to us and they would say, well, what do we do? What should we do? And my answer was always, well, it's the same thing you should have been doing before that, before GDPR came into effect. But now you're going to be penalized, financially if anything goes wrong, right? So it's there hasn't been any change, but it's now like literally forcing you to think about it, just so your business isn't exposed. And then, of course, there's the resilience piece. So you have to design for resilience, not just to keep your site alive in like the normal circumstances, when people are accessing it, but it's also important to for the site for your services to remain resilient even when under attack, right? For example, we have a lot of that experience in Microsoft, say with Xbox, right? Xbox gets attacked a lot, and what the primary goal is that the Xbox service stays alive and people can game. You might think, well, that's not really that might not be an essential service, but if there's if there's a COVID situation, a lot of people are at home. You can also claim that it helps keep those people sane. So just think of that as well. Baseline and benchmark design principle, that's a very important one, because if you don't know what is the baseline of your service or project or whatever you're actually working on, right, and you haven't benchmarked it, well, then how do you know if it's doing well or not? So that's one of the things that is very important, right? If the baseline says, well, this API has been under this amount of traffic and now that changes, well, you have to investigate. If the benchmark and the baseline says, well, we've this API A has never talked to API B but now starts doing that, you have to investigate, right? Maybe there's somebody in your staff forgot to update the policy, but you still need to know about it and act on it, because it can be actually that it's an attack is going on. So through that you have to drive continuous improvement, right? Once you have baseline and benchmark, you can drive improvement through that. You can see what you have and how it handles. You also have to do a lot of testing, as was mentioned in the calls before, the sessions before, because it's one of those things. Once you know it, you can improve on it. And again, you assume zero trust, both to the people that are accessing the system, but also to the services that interact with each other. And just because you might be doing really well, let's say, in the security of your infrastructure or your code or your everything that's running in the cloud, right? You have to also educate and incentivize security in your own projects, right, as they're going on, just so that people start building in security from scratch instead of kind of ham-fisting it at the end, right? And then the education piece is also important, because there will be a lot of attempts to go after people instead of infrastructure to get access into your systems. One way to kind of get all that done is to do an exercise in threat modeling, right? The idea is you must rely on a model to kind of guide your risk mitigation. Because the threat model is different if you're the say president of the United States or president of Ireland, or somebody in the public eye, right? Or if you're just a guy giving a talk online about security, right? So there are different risk mitigation strategies for most of us, right? And it goes the same well for your project, right? Another way to kind of help with all this is to lower the risk, right? You have to build resilience into your strategy. So if we have a project running, and if A happens, well, what do we do? If B happens, what do we do? And once you get to kind of Q and P and R and Z, you're getting very good at kind of building those resilience concepts into your strategy. And what you also want to do is increase the attacker cost, right? So, for example, there are services in Azure that help mitigate DDoS attacks, right? Which means that no matter what scale the attack is coming from, kind of Microsoft can help you mitigate that, and that increases the attacker cost, right? If they can bring your site down with a couple of VMs, it's a lot cheaper than if they have to spin up a whole 100,000 machine cluster in another cloud to get this one to go down, right? So it's all about lowering the risk. On the administration piece, right, you have to work towards zero people have privileged access, right? So that's not always possible. But for example, if you're say if you have production access, what we try to do with our customers is nobody has access to production except the automation accounts, right, and the DevOps tools and things like that, right? Because you don't want to to have access into that, because then anything that gets compromised, your production system is compromised as well, right? But in general, you want to grant the fewest number of accounts to privileges, right? And another thing you want to do is, even if you don't have access to some of these, you might need it from time to time. So there, you can kick in with just-in-time privileges, right? That'll help you. A partner needs to say do some maintenance or deploy a new feature. Well, we're just going to give their tools access for 3 hours, and they have that time to get it done. And if they're not done, they have to request a new, renew access. And then, of course, what you also have to do is continuous simulation of attacks for your critical impact accounts, because they're going to be under heavy load, especially if somebody targets you particularly, right? On the identity management piece, we're going to talk about, RBAC, which is role-based access control. It's one of those kind of everybody knows about it, but not everybody uses it to up to standard, right? So the idea is you really have to use the inbuilt controls to manage access to all your systems, right? So even if you have a team that manages your networking and your infrastructure and maybe cloud native, well, potentially not everybody in the team needs access to the entire landscape, right? They might just need access, the networking team just to the network piece. So forth, right? Then what you also want to do is use a separate identity source for third-party accounts, right? So, for example, if you're using Active Directory for all your access, well, you want to use a separate Active Directory for access to say, all your customers, right, that are logging in. Of course, you're going to enable multi-factor authentication. I think there's, some of the companies that we work with are not enabling this, but default. But it should start, becoming more and more standard, and eventually it's just going to be the default way of doing things. There are huge lists online that you can buy for $10 if you want to go on the nefarious side, or you can get them from security experts, and they contain a list of billions of common passwords, and it's very easy to kind of ingest that into your tools and just kind of double check the passwords that you're allowing your customers to set on, just so they're not on that list. Things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So hopefully you're avoiding at least that one. But with a billion of them, and these passwords are just the ones that we know of that are compromised, right? So it's good to know that you shouldn't reuse them. And then, of course, like I've mentioned before, you have to balance security versus productivity, right? Depending on your productivity needs, you have to enable things like self-service, right? So if you have 1 million customers, you don't want to have a password form where you reset passwords. You want to have them do this, or recovery passwords, or even reporting bad actors and things like that. You want to have all that in a self-service environment. So then on the kind of storage data and encryption side, we usually get asked by customers, well, should we, what should we encrypt? And my answer is always yes, meaning you should encrypt everything, right? Because it doesn't matter that you're controlling the environment, and your one of your APIs is talking to another one. It should still be encrypted. Why? Because, well, if an attacker gets access to any single piece of your environment, it kind of prevents them from escalating that too quickly, right? To get it to kind of monitor traffic that's going across your kind of secure network that you presupposed, and is because you've encrypted it, right? There's, they can't listen from one piece of your infrastructure that they've compromised on another. And then, just don't forget this in-transit encryption, because usually people turn on the storage and all that. Sometimes they forget in-transit encryption, especially within the environment itself. On the network security piece, you should centralize your network management as much as you can, and then kind of have a hub and spoke mechanism that all the other projects are working towards. You should also have separate networks that still centralized in your team, but separate for access that maybe requires your access to on premises, and maybe that something is just publicly available. You should also use AI to kind of monitor all that traffic and figure out anomalies. You need to build a containment strategy to kind of figure out, is there if something happens, like how do we contain it, and what are the kind of the switches that we can flip to kind of stop somebody in their tracks. And then there's the whole landscape of DDoS mitigation that you need to work with. So on the security operations, right, if you have to detect, respond, and recover quickly, and the faster you can do these things, the better. So the best case scenario is that you can automate this, and then you can detect something, respond to it, and recover automatically, right? That might not be possible always, but at least the detect step should be automated, right? You should be able to know if there's something happening in your environment that you haven't built into it. And the reason is, you want to reduce the time to acknowledge and remediate, because the more time the attacker has, the worse it's going to get. And of course, you want to prioritize security investments into more valuable systems, meaning, for example, if you've separated out your kind of environments, you might be hosting workloads in Azure that you only have access to through your on-premises network. And, it's basically secure because there is no access from the internet. So it's only insecure if somebody, kind of gets access via the backdoor through your network. But if you have a separate system that's accessible online, and it's that's the one that you should potentially prioritize more if it's more valuable to you. And if you don't have this automatic detection and alerting, you can't really then claim that you are secure, right? And I mean that's like number one. If I walk into your environment and can do whatever I want before you even realize it, but and you don't get alerted and it start investigating immediately, well, then you're one of those companies, that the question is, have you ever been breached, right? And it's like you don't know, which means yes you have. So you should also, there's proactive hunting activities, right? So what do if you're specifically, involved in pieces of security that might get under attack deliberately, right? You should have also hunting activities as well running in your environments. I'm just checking the time. We're good. So let me just then go directly to compliance, because it's tied in quite significantly with security, right? But it's one of those that it's very complex because there's a lot of moving parts. So let's quickly go through it. Well, in Azure, we try to help you out because there's Azure is certified in about 90 plus different compliance offerings, right? The idea is, we want to be it's one of those shared responsibility principles, right? We want to help you out as much as we can, but you still need to be mindful of those, right? It's just if you trust the cloud and our services have been vetted against these compliance offerings, you can get reports and you can then report on those as you're building your own solutions, right? And I've had the kind of luck or bad luck to work with the law, with the authorities and the regulators on some of these, right? And they would frequently publish these standards, right, to help define good security, right? And one of the fallback or traps that people kind of fall into is you do implement everything that's expected in the in these good security practices, right? But that's usually not enough. That's just to show that you've actually done your due diligence and you've done kind of the minimum effort to actually get some of these things under control, right? But to actually be secure, that's just not enough, right? You have to do more. And some of recommendations in these standards are quite difficult to adapt to the cloud because they are, outdated security practices and they won't sufficiently protect your cloud workloads, right? So, for example, there's, in the PCI, you have to kind of some of the data separate to some other data. Well, that's a good approach. It might not give you the robustness you need in the cloud, right? You might you might need to think about a whole lot other aspect of security to kind of be actually secure instead of just abiding by the compliance regulation, right? And so how is this going to be monitored, audited, and reported? That's the piece of the governance that compliance imposes on you. So this is one of the things about reporting and managing your infrastructure, right? So you have to know how are you going to monitor, who is going to be involved, how are things going to be audited, who's going to be involved with that, what are the reports that are going to be generated, who's going to get those reports, and then are you improving, are you actually kind of working constantly in your environment to get things done and improved on all these fronts, on monitoring, on auditing, on reporting, but also directly on securing your environment. And you have to then, of course, stay on top of all the new regulation, right? So it's are there new requirements? Are they, have they been published? Are they, maybe published in preview, and maybe you can comment on them? Or are they just published overnight and now you have to abide by them? And quick scramble to get things done. Another new thing that is kind of very important at the moment is there mandatory reporting? So things around GDPR, for example. If you are breached, if anything is leaked, any privacy data from your customers, right, or anything like that, you have a mandatory and law duty to actually report on that, and you could be fined quite significantly if you don't abide by those, right? So again, one of those kind of monitors, audited, and reported procedures that you should be following is, if there is something that happens and we have to report, who's going to report it and in which time, right? And it's one of those things. I'm kind of lucky to be working for Microsoft at the moment, and they are, there's a lot of learning tools that we go through that are explaining this. So, for example, if somebody reaches out to you on the GDPR site, what do you do? How do you proceed? If you've accidentally leaked data, what do you do? How do you proceed? So you have to get that done into your kind of governance system as well. And then there are different industry governances, and there might be even governmental ones. For example, maybe government mandates that this piece of data cannot leave Ireland, for example, right? Well, then you have to kind of architect your solution so that it is possible. Luckily, with Azure, you can do those things. You can also, again, it's in all of these kind of compliance requirements, there are clear lines of responsibility, and sometimes you have to nominate people, directly, even for the compliance documents, right? So they are themselves responsible. So it's not just kind of a vague concept of the organization that's responsible. It's particular individuals, right? And then of course you have to train those individuals. You have to plan their kind of their absence at times. You have to plan on their actions and things that need to happen when compliance is breached. And then, of course, you need to audit and enforce the compliance, right? This goes beyond, the previous mention of auditing, when you're auditing that you're, what is going on in the system, but you have to kind of enforce the compliance across your organization, across your people, across your processes, right? And you have to be able to also show that you're enforcing this, right? So there needs to be paper trails, there needs to be documents, evidence, even if you want to call it that way, right? To actually get these things done. And welcome to your new life now, because there's a lot of talk with our customers about these exercises with red and blue teams. So everybody's heard of those, right? I mean, it's exciting, it's fun, but what people don't realize is it's a continuous, constant, 24/7 process that needs to be followed, right? Especially if you're running in production in anger, right, against your a billion customers, right? So you need to really do this well. And we get a lot of customers who want to do this, but then they're going to schedule it, like a week before production, and like after a year of development, right? So that's not the best idea. Also, once they've actually done this once, let's say a week before production, and usually they discover all kinds of things that need to be improved, right? And now you can't, because there's a marketing web email has already gone out, and people are basically banging on the door, trying to get in. So you can't now delay. So then you scramble to try and fix things. Then you deprioritize, and then you just launch. So that's not good. And then even if like you went through all these exercises and they did well, you did well. You've done it a few times. You've improved, and now you're in production. And then you just say, "Well, we're done. Let's because we've tested it." Well, that's also not true because especially in this new era, like services in the cloud change, new services come on board, their services are retired, there's new new vulnerabilities discovered and things like that. There's new ideas out there, right? That previously might not have even existed, right? How to breach your system or how to do bad things with your data. In order to kind of acquire it and send it on. So this is one of those things that just is going to be your new life everywhere. And well, let me just for those folks that are not as acquainted with this, the red team is basically the team that is doing things like code reviews. They're modeling threats. They're doing security testing, and they're doing all kinds of things. And then you have the blue team, which is kind of war game exercises. You do live set penetration tests. You do central security monitoring and all kinds of things like that. And one of the patterns we've seen and we recommend is that you change who is these responsibilities for the red team and the blue team, right? So maybe the red team has a 3 months or a 6 month period. They do all these things, and then sometimes we've seen it like people like the colors, so they want to stay the red team, but then you still need to switch what they're doing, right? So sometimes you're attacking, sometimes you're defending. That just gives you fresh perspectives. That just gives you keeps your the people up to skills. Up to their security skills, and it kind of just makes things a lot more exciting as well, right? Because it's not that you're just defending or you're just attacking. Well, you have to be also in the other position to now do that, to do the same things. And one of the other things I would say is, there's another, quite a few patterns around this, but usually you have a few people in one team and few in another. Some teams like to keep the teams together, so when they switch, they kind of have the team cohesion and they continue working together. But some companies prefer like a randomized model. So let's say that you're changing the teams every 6 months. Well, you randomize who gets to be on the red team and the blue team every time, which means then you get kind of more exciting dynamic in the team, and potentially new ideas arise from that as well, right? So there's we could talk about this for quite a bit, just because it's fun and it's exciting, and there's a lot of folks that are that are new and they're trying to get this done, and there's a lot of patterns that are in the teams that have been doing this for decades now. So it's good to learn from those. And so that's it for now. I'm hoping that you're going to be interested in security, going to be interested in compliance, and you're going to check out the links that I've shown you before. I'm sure we can find a way to distribute the slides as well, and you can go and check them out. And let me just mention that I really like engaging with the community. So if you want to check me out on Twitter or LinkedIn, you can do that now. So with that, this is the last slide. The same as the first one. So if we can go into questions, if there are any.
Thank you so much for that, Sasha. That was a great session. And for all of you watching, if you haven't had a chance, please do use the QR code or the link on the screen right now to register your interest and get some resources. So Sasha, we have a few questions, if that's all right for you. And
yeah, go ahead.
Pop them on the screen. Perfect. So what is the difference between different cloud providers when it comes to these pillars and security? Are they different, or are these things universal?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's well, I mean, it depends on the cloud providers, right? I mean, if you talk about the top tier, right, the hyperscale, right, which is Azure and those other two, right, the AWS and GCP. I mean, it will be quite similar, right? You might get more benefit if you work with Microsoft in in certain areas because you have an account team and we try and work with you, but basically the pillars themselves shouldn't change, right? The way you think about security should be the same. And the things that will change is, of course, there's different implementations in different clouds, right? And then if you're thinking about, some of those kind of cloud providers, they're not top tier, right? I'm not going to name them, but yeah, the rest of the, outside of these three, there's ones in China, there's ones across the globe, right? So they might have gaps potentially in some of these areas, but they, just if you still think about these 5 pillars and you kind of work through them, you will still be able to achieve security, right? It might just be a bit more difficult, or you might have to kind of do a bit more work yourself, and then and it also goes the same for kind of governance and compliance, right? So it, you should be able to achieve the same effect if you think through all this.
Good. So security is generally agnostic to any of these.
Yeah.
So we also have a question here. Can you provide some thoughts on how important identity management is becoming for security to organizations in cloud?
Yes. Well, so as I've mentioned before, you would kind of do things like network monitoring, and that would be kind of your security ideal situation, right? You want to know all traffic, where it's going, right? Well, now you can't, because number one, you don't have access to all this network, and number two, it might be now overwhelming, right? If you have 1 billion people accessing your website trying to purchase something, even if you automate things and if you have AI, you might still struggle to get through all that, right? So the idea is you want to make sure that your identities that you're using, both for yourself and your staff and the customers, are handled correctly, right? And then the privilege of zero trust and least privilege, right, applies. So for example, if you have some customers that need to browse your website, well, none of their accounts needs access to any of the back end services, right? So if even the accounts that they are using, that in the back end to access the information, that account that you control shouldn't have access to say right permissions, right? If these customers can only browse, right, and things like that. So I would say that's number one. And if you do that well, and it's very difficult to do that well, you should be fine. And then you have to do things on that as kind of a to figure out, is this the normal pattern of things? If people are accessing our application in this way, well, what happens now if they start running bots, or if they start accessing, if I've always accessed my account from Croatia and Ireland, well, now if I'm in China or Japan, that might, maybe that's a red flag right there. So you might not act on it. You might not forbid access, right? Because, well, they've only just logged in and checked two web pages, but maybe maybe you just keep an eye on them. Maybe you flag it to them. Maybe you send them an alert via SMS or an out of band, just to make sure that it's them. Usually you would see this with banks, so they've gotten pretty good at this one. So I have well, I don't want to mention the bank because they're terrible usually, but they're very good at security, at least. So, for example, if I buy something in Hungary when I was on vacation there, they would just text me and say, somebody purchased something. Was this you? And can you verify with your PIN? So that there are patterns you can follow to kind of stay on top of this.
Perfect. Andrew has a question in 3 parts. So he typically looks after software developers and DevOps, even though a number of organizations often outsource DBA and dev roles externally to third parties. What do we do in that scenario in case of due diligence in that external yet also internal environment? As he's found too many times that the client is vulnerable or exposed in some way, even though it's ignored. Would you have any tips for that?
Yes, we get that a lot with our customers. So we work with kind of the top tier customers in Azure in the customer success. So these are the companies that have maybe like they're very large global companies, and they've either purchased a lot of other companies, or they're working with a lot of kind of outsourced developers or third parties, or even Microsoft partners and things like that, right? And what we usually see is like it's our back controls, right? Again, the identity. But they usually do this directly, right? They would just, well, you need access to this project. Well, we'll kind of build a little bubble for you and allow you to deploy there, do things like, and then in certain things like managed services, if they're kind of trying to manage the service for you in production, then you just give them access as well. So it's a bad pattern, but it's a pattern we see a lot. So in terms of vetting, there's a lot you can do, but that's quite expensive, right? It's one of those, if I now need to vet all my partners and people who work there, that's going to be cumbersome, right? So Microsoft can potentially do this, and I had to go through a vetting process before I joined, right? But you might not be able to or want to even, right? Well, what you do then is you have a kind of a proxy pattern, right, where these people all have access to a environment, right, which isn't tied to any of your production or even non-production systems, and then you give them access to that, and then there's just through automation, you then deploy those things after you've made sure yourselves that all of that is kind of good and verified, that it gets deployed into production. So basically, they're kind of one step removed. You have to then do kind of things, a bit of due diligence, right? So for example, Microsoft does this with we've open source .NET, and we get a lot of pull requests, right? Well, somebody has to look into those pull requests and see if they're they're secure, they're good for the community and things like that. So you might now need to be doing that more. And then there's a piece of just working with knowing who the people are that are doing this, and kind of getting to know them and what their patterns are, just so you are confident that they know what they're doing, right? And then it's one of those, some companies invest in skilling their own staff, but don't invest so much in skilling the partner staff or vendors and things like that, right? So you have to stay on top of that as well. But yeah, it's another one of those kind of complex issues you can go on and on about. But there's a lot you can do to if you just kind of think through it and get it done.
Andrew's kind of expanded on that as well. He's found it hard to qualify that third party is enforcing security protocols like role-based access or RBAC. Would you have any tips for that?
Yes, so that's it's more about auditing, right? So it's one of those things, like you like there is no way for you to know, Andrew, right? If somebody else is sharing their password, right? You can't know it, right? If it's a dev team, I don't know, in Poland, like for a random example, they might be sharing passwords, they might be doing things insecurely. But if you again do kind of due diligence there, and maybe have them guide you through it, walk you through these exercises. Potentially, you can also have things like getting just reports, when people are on vacation and things like that, so you can monitor that they're accessing the information or the projects or the infrastructure through the safe environments. But it's more about auditing and just verifying their processes, because there is no chance for you to know something outside of your kind of remit, right? And then it's one of those, you can always do random checks, right? If somebody's doing something, you pick up a phone and call them and say, is this you're doing it, and explain why you're doing it. So you don't need to annoy people with this, but if you do it sometimes, that they'll be very careful what they're actually doing, right?
Perfect. Andrew's also just added on to that. It's often a minefield because he's often migrating the devs onto newer platforms. Often the UK devs are the immediate issue, and the outsourced devs are not on the ball either, sadly.
Yes, we see that a lot as well, and it's one of those things that it's unlikely to improve, because it's customers are going over the that everybody's chasing kind of the lowest common denominator in terms of cost and whatnot. So that's always going to be an issue. But if you know about this and you're trying to do things better, you're already better than like 99.99% of the other companies. So consider yourself lucky then,
Yeah. We might move on to another question. How is automation and embracing automation helping security exactly?
Well, yeah, it's another one of those great questions, right? It's well, number one, I'm a developer and I'm lazy. I want to be lazy, and I want everybody who ever works for me or with me to be lazy, because then they'll automate things, right? And if they automate things, then you kind of have to do due diligence whilst you're doing this. You have to make sure that it works. You have to make it robust enough that if something breaks, the automation still works. But once you've done that, you're kind of flying, right? It's a good way of getting things done. And especially in security, if you automate things, well, that means that you've kind of automated it, you've vetted it, you've tested it, you've verified that it works, you've verified that it is secure, and it's one of those kind of, well, I don't have to think about it anymore, right? You still kind of have to go back, let's say quarterly, or whatever your schedule is, to double check that all that is fine and it's working. But that's where kind of monitoring and auditing and alerting comes in as well. So if you're doing that, that's why we kind of keep saying automation is key. And I mean, just outside of security, you want your folks to be automating things. You don't want to have them do the same thing twice just because it's more efficient. So
perfect. I think that seems to be all the questions we have so far. If you guys have any questions at all, please do put them in the chat now. And Andrew just has a comment here. He keeps finding older servers with Windows 2003 still around.
Yes. Well, yeah. One thing that I didn't mention here, and I should because I work for Microsoft, is patch Windows, patch everything. Like if you are not patching, you should be. So at least you don't have to roll the the updates that we've improved Windows in making it more prettier or kind of faster. Even that doesn't matter. But if it's a security patch immediately, because usually we know something that the market doesn't yet. But once we publish the patches, then it's public. The patches explain, people know what it's doing, and it can be reverse engineered, and then it can be used against you. So patch. If I haven't mentioned this again, so patch.
Perfect. We have another question coming in. How does one know which talent suits them better, the blue or red team?
Yes, well, so I think I've potentially maybe answered that one already, but the idea is you should be able to work in both, right? You should be able to kind of attack and defend, because there is a chance that you're very good at attacking but very bad at defending, which is fine because you might have a lot of imagination. You can try various crazy things, but then you might not have the necessary technical skills then to actually fix that, right? So that's where you might start. But I would say it's one of those. What you like more? Are you kind of the you want to be the good guy and fix things, or you want to be the bad guy and break things? Or you want to kind of switch it up and do both things. So
that's perfect. I think that's all the questions we have now, unless anyone wants to ask anything else. We still have 3 or 4 minutes.
Oh yeah, I see a comment there by old MS source code is now out in the wild. Yes, yeah, things happen, right? So it's that one of the best things about the cloud is it's kind of the evergreen environment, right? If you use the cloud native services, you're going to be always well, not always protected, but you're going to be in one of those environments that is kind of automatically updating for you instead of you managing a lot of things there. And yeah, Andrew, no worries. I see your comment. So yeah, ping me up on LinkedIn or tweet, and we'll talk.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for that great session and that great presentation. I definitely learned a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much. So we're going to have a short 15-minute break, and we'll be back with Derek Smith. So we'll see you in about 15 minutes. Thanks.
Bye all.
everyone.
Hello,
Welcome
everyone.
back.
Hi, Dana. Sorry. It was such a great session provided by Sasha. What do you think?
That was great. Yeah. And as someone who also works with the government, I understood a lot of the pains there. Yeah.
Yeah, so we are really lucky because we got really great sessions in the morning, even from Ishan and even from Martin. So, and I'm sure we will get a great session from Derek as well. So do you want to introduce Derek?
Yeah.
Dana.
So now we have Derek, and he'll be providing us with the last live session of the day. I'm just going to pop your face on, if that's all right, Derek.
Hi there.
Hiya.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Oh, busy, very busy, but happy to be joining this on this Saturday. It's I heard Sasha talking about it's an unusually sunny day over there. It's unusually cloudy and a little bit rainy here. So if he wants to swap, I'm welcome to switch with him.
That's absolutely fair. So you'll be talking with us about resources and cost optimization now. Thank you so much for coming on, and I'm sure you'll be finishing up this day for us very well. If you don't mind me popping your screen up as well.
Yep.
So everyone knows the drill. If you can just sign up there, either through the link on the screen or the QR code, just to get some free resources by Microsoft, and also to register your interest with us, just to let Microsoft know that we've been providing all these sessions for the community. If you want to take it away, Derek.
All right, sounds good. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Derek Smith. I am a senior technical consultant at Ahead. It is about 11 a.m. here in the United States. I know everyone else, it is whatever hour it is around the world. So thank you for joining. We're going to be talking about optimization benefits within the cloud, specifically around cost optimization and resource optimization, and how you can best achieve the business goals that you might be looking towards from a high level perspective, and how you translate that into spinning up your cloud resources. My LinkedIn bio and Instagram handle down there at the bottom. Feel free to give me a connect, hit me up with a message. Always willing to chat with fellow cloud folks on either platform. Been fortunate to have a lot of support and pushing a lot of great content on the cloud. So feel free to give me a follow, give me a like, shoot me a message. Happy to interact with anybody. A little background on myself. I've been in IT now for a little over 15 years. I originally started as a network administrator, working for small organizations, and then obviously working my up as a network engineer in a lot more larger enterprise and even government organizations. So Dana, I know your pain about dealing with the government from that perspective. But after spending some time as a network engineer, I started learning about this fun thing called the cloud. And it got me really excited. And I thought it was a nice transition to jump into from a career perspective. And it's been a great last 5 years working in the cloud. I've spent most of my cloud time working within the Azure platform, working mostly on the solution architect side of the house. So taking those business level requirements and translating them into cloud solutions for any number of organizations, from finance, healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, you name it. When I'm not doing IT related stuff, I really enjoy history and reading. As you can see behind me here, I have this really nice bookcase. However, it is empty because I'm actually moving in about 6 days. So all of my fantastic books that normally are behind me are in boxes. The winter time is coming up for some of us. So during that time, you will find me on a mountain somewhere with snow. I love snowboarding a lot. So I'm typically up there during the winter months because I can't get enough of it. Just a little bit more about me, certifications. I hold a number of Azure certifications and Microsoft certifications, and a number of agnostic certifications from CompTIA, as well as a whole host of Cisco certifications. But I don't have a page big enough to put them all on, so I just chose to leave those out. All right. So why optimization? A lot of organizations, when they're looking to the cloud, and you as a cloud solution architect or as a developer, or any person who ends up being on that cloud team, your organization or your customer may come to me and say, hey, I've heard about this cloud. It has all these capabilities around compute, storage, networking, you name it. And they want to add that to their IT landscape. And so 9 times out of 10, at least in my experience, obviously one of the first thing that comes up is, well, this is what we want to do. So how do I get there? Can you figure this out? Right? Because from a high level perspective, they've seen the glitz and the glamour of the cloud, but they don't know the underlying capabilities of really how to translate those ideas into actualities. And so you as the solutioner, the solution architect, need to kind of take those high level constraints, those business ideas, and translate them into actual resources. Now, obviously, there are multitudes of benefits of migrating to the cloud. One of those, obviously, is that resource optimization. A lot of large organizations, small organizations, you name it, over the last 20 to 30 years have accumulated large on-prem infrastructures. 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't uncommon to have a single server with a single application on it. Obviously now, within the last 10, 15 years, right, virtualization has drastically changed that. And now even with the cloud, we've changed that even further with containerization, right? You can run multiple workloads on a single virtual machine instance. However, typically, organizations are kind of in that virtualization phase and not quite containerization phase, but they still are running huge costs from an on-prem perspective. And so typically organizations will ask you, well, how much is this going to cost me, right? What is my bill going to be? Because in their mind, they want to understand what it's going to cost up front. And that stems from a CapEx mentality versus a OpEx mentality, which is where the cloud operates, right? Typically, most organizations have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in one fell swoop, and then they don't have to worry about it for 3, 4, 5, or even longer years within regards to their IT assets. And so they're used to dropping a huge sum of money one time, not a smaller amount of money over a gradual period of time. And so trying to communicate that to an organization and say, well, your cost is going to be X per month, but then they will turn around, well, what's it going to be per year? Or what's it going to be over 3 years, right? So you kind of have to take that mentality and slowly walk them towards, hey, you're going to start paying on a monthly basis or a per hour basis, or even there are some resources that bill per second, right? So they've got to kind of follow you down this yellow brick road, so to speak, as to how you translate a normally huge capital expense into much smaller operational type expenses. And so with this comes this idea of, if I can reduce those costs, or if I can even avoid those costs, right? Having a cost avoidance measure, how then do I turn around and optimize those resources that I am then going to place in the cloud, right? Typically, a lot of organizations, their way to get into the cloud is from a lift and shift perspective. But what we don't want to do for them is just lift and shift as is, right? We're not giving them some of the benefits of the cloud. And that's kind of where that resource optimization part comes in. You need to understand what workloads they have, how they currently operate from a metric perspective, get that data, and then how to best translate that into the new cloud resources that these workloads are then going to migrate to. Because ultimately, we want to make sure that the usage trend of their optimized resources follows a usage trend of their cost. It's not always going to be 1-for-1, 100%, but you want to get it in a close enough range to where you're not overspending, and also you're not underperforming from a resource perspective to where your resources are pegged, because you want to keep costs down, right? You want to kind of maintain that ratio of cost and performance capability. Right. So the number one biggest factor for a lot of organizations is cost reduction. Every design choice has an implication, whether it's to add another server here, another storage account over here. But before choosing that architecture pattern that you ultimately design for that workload, you want to make sure that it's important to consider the organization's budget constraints. We know the cloud has a near infinite capability, right? And everything has a certain little cost amount. And so it's easy to kind of go down that rabbit hole for a lot of cloud solution architects to say, okay, they want to do this. Let me start gathering up all these various things as a way to achieve that. However, you need to keep in mind that while all of those things are great, and I would love to spin up, X number of, SQL things here, or X number of serverless things here, ultimately that organization does have a budget. They do have to keep spend under a certain amount. So you need to take that into consideration when designing your solution and keep that within an acceptable boundary. Obviously, there are other factors that are going to influence the design from a business perspective, but ultimately, one of the primary things to understand from right out of the gate is there a budget? Is there a cost ceiling that the organization is not willing to go over? And so you need to take that into consideration. However, you also need to consider the opposite benefits of a cost reduction, right? Maybe that organization owns and operates their own data center, or maybe they're in a colo facility, right? That contract or that service may be coming up, or maybe they're able to get out of it whenever they so choose. So that may help your cost budget ceiling. So you also need to investigate that avenue. Is there anything that you can reduce or get rid of with the move to the cloud? Is it getting out of a data center, right? Getting out of that colo? Is it, administrative? Can I optimize automation and, reduce admin, toil, as we like to call, so there, IT staff is not spending time doing repetitive tasks. Can we do things of that nature? So going down both avenues with those business leaders, that high level interaction with a lot of people is paramount in understanding how we can help reduce costs and make sure that we are falling within those budget constraints, but we're proving that the cloud has value. And as you can see, 2020, I know it's been a crap year for a lot of people, but just with everything going on, right? The economy from a global perspective has somewhat kind of slowed down to a certain extent. And so organizations globally, their number one thing is cost savings by a healthy margin. And that's still, I think that's been the case now for the last 4 to 5 years. Cost optimization is number one on organizations' mind, right? How do I get the most out of my cloud resources while maximizing, profit return, that black versus red line. There are other considerations taken the fast, right? You see migrating workloads, containers, cloud first strategy, automation for toil. But surprisingly, a lot higher up there is also better financial reporting on cloud costs. So you see costs kind of pop up here a number of times: cost savings, reporting, SaaS applications, managed software licenses, right? Expand use of MSPs. So cost kind of pops up as a top of mind cloud initiative for a lot of people. And so how do we best avoid some of those costs, right? We talked about the traditional purchase model of CapEx, right? Companies sink in huge costs into IT infrastructure right out of the gate, right? Because they have to assume that a certain capacity is going to happen eventually. But the problem is that they don't actually know. A lot of organizations do not have dedicated teams that can do IT capacity planning. So they do their best guess and say, okay, well, I think the usage of my workload is going to be X, so we're going to buy for X. The problem is I think 80% of the time they don't ever hit that. And even if they do, then, if they do hit X, or even more likely exceed X, then they have to turn around and go dump another huge sum of money on costly upgrades to upgrade the infrastructure because they under-provisioned it. Now, this is kind of where flipping it over and showing how an OpEx cost model is more efficient. As your cloud usage goes up, right, my cost usage then keeps pace with it within kind of an acceptable margin, right? There may be times where things spike up and down and you have some of those peaks, right? And we'll talk about some of those features here in a little bit. But the goal is to kind of keep it within this healthy range where if you do see some peaks, right, you're not overall impacting your resources, both from a performance capability and from a cost perspective. But at the same time, you're getting the full usage out of the resources you have provisioned. So ultimately, consumption model is cost avoidance. How do I avoid spending some of those costs, right? I don't want to spend a ton of money on hardware, software, development, operations, security. Sasha may argue with me on that one. Data center space, electric, cooling, you name it, right? There's a whole host of costs that go into owning and operating your IT infrastructure from an on-prem perspective, that a lot of that can get offloaded onto a cloud solution provider. And you can only, spend a certain amount of money on the things that matter most. Now, there are certain trade-offs that do need to be considered when it comes to cost optimization. Obviously, business requirements don't always lend themselves to cost-saving measures. We can talk about security, we can talk about business continuity and disaster recovery, right? All of the various pillars have certain influences within cost and resource optimization. And so it's important to remember that ultimately the business context dictates where you're going to go. You just need to be forthcoming in, well, if you want, HA capability, or you have an SLA of 4 nines or 5 nines, right? That costs money. And so if you're looking to save money, you may not be able to do that with that particular business context decision. So there are certain trade-offs that you need to understand that determine your architecture decisions. That being said, availability can help save some costs within development. So things like dev workloads, dev tests, there are ways to reduce your cost from that perspective, which then can help kind of offset some of the more higher costs of either, improving availability of mission critical workloads or improving security within certain workloads, right? So there are certain trade-offs that you're going to have to worry about balancing. But does the cost of high availability, ultimately you have to worry about downtime, RTO, RPO. Those costs will have to come into consideration. Boosting performance leads to higher costs. Increasing security leads to higher cost. So all of those things are things to take into consideration when putting those into your cost optimization process. Now, the biggest thing with cost optimization that a lot of people think of is they think it's a point-in-time activity, and it truly is not a point-in-time activity. It is now, because it is a operational model, it is a always activity. You should always be monitoring your cost, always checking to see where you are, what you're doing, where is your budget, what are your alertings, did something, spike higher than expected? Did it, is there some type of cost anomaly, unexpected usage? Are there resources that are not being utilized, right? So you're sinking costs into something that may not even be in use, or have a very low threshold to which you can either scale down that resource or maybe look for an alternative way. So the ultimate goal of cost monitoring is to make sure that you're reviewing that cloud spend with the intent of establishing control so you don't have any misuse of either resources or usage of the existing resources. Most effective cost reviews are usually conducted by certain stakeholders, right? Typically finance departments, CFOs, things of that nature. But you also need to involve the IT or cloud IT team to make sure that they can see exactly what the limits are and who should be making those decisions based on the metrics that they're seeing. You want to make sure that that cadence is set up on a regular basis. It doesn't necessarily need to be every week. It can be every month, every quarter, semi-annually, annually, whatever, ultimately works for those organizations. But having that cadence, making sure that the costs are reviewed, what's doing what versus what's not being utilized, so you're getting that optimization benefit and keeping costs within the acceptable margins that are deemed acceptable by the organization. Now, we always want to ensure that we're using the right resources and the right size of resources. Ultimately, because that's what we need to be aligned with the business goals. But more importantly, from a cost perspective, if the resource isn't configured right, your costs tend to be higher, or there is a performance impact that, again, negatively impacts the organization from a cost perspective. If it's a web app or an e-commerce application, if it's not configured correctly, right, I'm not generating revenue, which in then turn drives that down, and then I'm getting blasted from support costs asking why my stuff isn't working, which leads to higher costs. So ultimately, we need to make sure that we're choosing the right resources that are aligned with those business goals to ensure that we're not misconfiguring our resources, which don't lead then to higher costs. Now, certain infrastructure resources are delivered in certain fixed sizes. So we need to make sure that those sizes are adequately sized to meet capacity. Our e-commerce example, right? We don't have a website. We're serving up, something like Target.com or an Amazon.com. Very rarely do users ever come in and complain that those websites are not available. Reason why? They're constantly monitoring all of the web app resources that are serving up those e-commerce sites, making sure that the capacity meets the demand that they're seeing, so that they're never having performance issues. On the flip side, they're not wasting the resources by serving up those things to their customers. And so that they're seeing the revenue come in, they're seeing people come in, they're not complaining about the website being down or not able to buy or access something. And then on the flip side, they're not having any type of admin higher costs. Now, one of the ways we help achieve that is auto scaling and dynamic scale capabilities. The cloud often reacts to variable loads of increasing and decreasing numbers over time. Now, the application needs to have to be designed with this in mind. Ultimately, a lot of legacy applications never knew of the capability of dynamic scaling, right? If a certain application needed certain requirements, that was put forth to you from the get-go and said, hey, for application X, I need a server with X amount of CPU, X amount of memory, and that was it, right? We loaded that thing up on a single server. That's all that ran onto it. So we didn't have any competing applications for those resources, and we dedicated those resources to that one application. And then along came virtualization. Application requirements started coming down. We were able to start sharing resources along multiple applications. And then now with the cloud, we now have applications that have dynamic scaling capability built in mind. So as our demand increases, the application can count on the cloud to scale dynamically to meet those needs. And ultimately, that speaks to scaling out versus scaling up. The auto-scaling features within the cloud are typically built around those mechanisms, right? We can put in rules. We can say, when my CPU reaches a certain amount of percentage, I want you to start scaling out X numbers so I can start handling that load, to ensure that those resources are available whenever they're needed and they're not hitting some type of performance bottleneck and we're seeing a negative impact on a customer or client perspective. The reason why we prefer that method versus scaling up is typically scaling up means downtime. We have to turn off, that resource, that application, scale it up to a larger size, and then turn it back on. And that involves downtime, that involves missing out on potential revenue, other various impacts. So we want to avoid scale up wherever possible. There are certain instances where, unfortunately, that is unavoidable depending on what type of configuration you have to ultimately go with, but it is preferable to use scale out with auto scaling capabilities in mind versus manual scale up capabilities. Ultimately, we want to avoid also client affinity. Client affinity is dedicating client traffic to a particular instance based on the request it's receiving. We've had a client who has a certain application. That application comes in to check something. But ultimately, the problem is the app was never designed to meet cloud scaling capabilities. So when the solution was designed for them, they needed a particular load balancing capability that pointed everything to server X. Well, ultimately, server X may go down. It may have a bad patch, some type of misconfiguration, whatever. And then the load balancer would then have to turn around and redirect to instance Y. This design is very, I don't want to say antiquated, but old school, right? The cloud is built to receive that traffic and then dynamically send the requests to both machines at the same time based on the metrics that you set so that the load is even between the machines. Ultimately, if one machine does eventually have an issue, it can be routed to instance Y. However, there also is the capability of the backend things to scale out even further. So that way, if one instance does go down, there are still multiple other instances that the cloud load balancing capabilities can then dump that traffic to. And so ultimately, that is where we would like our performance capabilities to meet that requirement. And so when we design those applications and we're designing those resource optimizations, ultimately, you also want to understand planning for growth. Knowing the upper scale of those limits, using sharding or decomposition to go beyond those limits, or ultimately maybe shifting around a strategy where you have to design the application to where you can add more scale units in the future. On the flip side of that, you also need to understand the negative impacts of those resources. A lot of pretty much all cloud providers do have an upper limit for scales. And so we need to take that into consideration when we're designing our solution. Is there a negative impact if I go beyond that upper limit? Do we start seeing performance, degradation? Do we start seeing issues with our web application or e-commerce solution, anything of that nature? So understanding what the potential for growth is, talking to those high-level business units saying, hey, where do you see this going in 1, 3, 5 years? And then incorporating that plan for growth into your cloud solution design and making sure that the solution you're building does not exceed those upper scaling limits. And if it does, how do you design around that to make sure that if the growth explodes or even the growth is massively unexpected, you're not catching the organization or the client off guard, and you can add the additional capacity and resources so there are no negative impacts for that system. So ultimately, we don't want to see wastage by the size of the resources, and this is why scaling out versus scaling up is critical. We see a gradual trend of auto scaling versus scaling up, right? There's a flat curve, and then eventually you're going to hit 100% peak utilization. You have to take the VM down as an example, scale it up, turn it back on, and then for a little while, you're going to see gradual things. So ultimately, having the ability to scale out versus scaling up is going to be critical within a robust infrastructure within the cloud environment. Now, it's a lot easier for that. Certainly, there are requirements that may dictate a scale up strategy versus a scale out strategy. And so that needs to be taken into account. If such a strategy is needed, there are ways to design around that from a resource capability. But ultimately, you want to try to prefer auto scaling as a design choice versus a scale up design choice. Now, one thing to help alleviate that resource optimization are things that we like to call background tasks. If a request for a service is expected to take a really long time or absorb a considerable amount of resource, you want to make sure you're offloading that task to a separate task. you want to use something like a background job or a background task to execute these behind the scenes. So our web front end or our application front end is not being bogged down. It can still service those requests. This strategy enables that service, right, to continue to receive those requests, remain responsive, and if there are any background tasks or anything else that's requiring considerable time or resources, right, then we implement our auto scaling capabilities and we scale out that across multiple compute units to handle those background tasks and still service the front end users. Now, there is another particular case where you might see what's called a shared nothing architecture. And so all of the premise behind a shared nothing architecture is each of the nodes have no single point of contention. And the reason being is if I'm getting multiple requests, I'll use Target or Amazon as my example, right? If I'm running a after Thanksgiving Day sale, right, and I've got all these users trying to ping me to buy certain things, a lot of those services are on what's called a shared nothing. So if a certain user, is making a run at a particular product and that product that serves that database, right, it's not on the same set of resources that, say, some other product over here might be needing, right? It's not shared. So all of the resources are dedicated to serving up product A, and then that way, if product B, starts getting interested, right, we're not impacting the performance of people going and accessing product B. Now, I will say typically a shared nothing architecture is usually not practical, but in large scale situations like a Target.com or an Amazon.com, right, that makes the most sense. However, it does ultimately provide you kind of a light at the end of the tunnel type of approach, right? I'm building towards shared nothing to where there is no contention within my solution design. Everything is independent and can service each other. And so you can start improving and building a better scalable resource and optimized capability as you work your way down towards that light at the end of the tunnel. So ultimately, from an optimization perspective, cost reduction, understanding the business as to how they want to spend money in the cloud, what is their ceiling? Do they have anything on-prem that they're looking to jettison, right? Is their software license coming up for renewal in X amount of time frame? Is their data center contract coming up from X amount of time frame, right? There are multiple factors that you want to talk to your organization or talk to your client about as to what is coming up or what is a reason why you are considering the cloud solution, and how best do I help reduce those costs and help you transition into a cloud operating model. And ultimately that does take walking them from that CapEx mindset into the operational mindset and understanding that costs are fluid, costs are as you go, pay consumption. You only bill for what you use, right? You don't need to sink a ton of money into dedicated hardware, license, software, things of that nature. And ultimately, when you start reducing costs, you start reducing or avoiding other costs, right? How ultimately do organizations optimize avoiding, high costs like those data centers, expensive contracts, expensive software licensing? Do we transition to something like a PaaS or a SaaS model to where we're only paying for our consumption? We're not paying for dedicated hardware to host online. Good examples are obviously things like Office 365, G Suite, Salesforce, things of that nature, right? The bulk of the world has moved into those SaaS models really because they're paying for what they need. They're not paying an exorbitant amount of money just to buy a ton of licensing or hardware or things of just in case. Now, ultimately, as we optimize those costs and avoid other costs, that will then influence the type of resources that we spin up in for the cloud. If I want to make sure that my resources are performing at a peak level, they will be within that cost graph that we saw earlier, right? Within kind of a 10 to 20% area of margin of error. So we're matching as my performance needs go this way, right? My cost needs kind of say just enough above it to where if there is sudden peaks, the resources can handle it. However, I'm only paying for the actual usage of my resources. And this ultimately goes back to going back to the organization or the client, understanding what their workloads do, how many users, what's the impact, right? And typically there are tools and other various software that you can use to analyze those workloads, and you want to do performance-based metrics and understanding what those workloads are doing under peak conditions and under just normal, not really doing a whole lot conditions. And that way you can find where that right level of utilization is and design your solution around that to make sure that you're not underutilizing the resource, but you're not over provisioning it either. You're right. You're finding that nice middle sweet spot. And finally, that ultimately leads into the reliability of the solution. If the solution is designed around that performance, knowing what the customer or organization needs, and I'm building the resources in a correct fashion that matches their performance capability, the solution will ultimately be reliable, and that it's always servicing those requests, those clients, those users for what they need without any significant or noticeable impact to their service. All right. So that's my session on cost and resource optimization. I hope everyone enjoyed some of the pointers to take into your cloud architecture design.
That was great,
We'll open
Derek.
it up
Thank
for
you so
questions.
much. And we do have a few questions here, if you don't mind. So first we have here, are there any scenarios where on-premise approaches would have less cost than cloud infrastructure?
There absolutely are scenarios where on-premise resources will have a cheaper cost, right? Ultimately, as an organization or you as a client or a user have to determine, data requirements or security requirements, right? If I put it up in the cloud, is the cost of security or the cost of compliance so high that it just doesn't make it feasible? Whereas if I stick it within my own four walls on infrastructure I already have, that ultimately may lead it to be a cheaper thing for you. So that is something that you're certainly going to have to investigate. That bar used to be a little more uneven over the years. Now, at least lately, from what I've seen, it's getting closer to being a fairly even thing. What you can do on-prem from a cost perspective or from a compliance or security nature is matching roughly what you have in the cloud. So you don't ultimately have to necessarily stick with on-prem or the cloud.
Perfect. And in your opinion, what is the easiest way to convince a client that optimizing cloud costs isn't a checklist, but a mindset?
Ultimately, the best approach that I typically use with clients, that it's certainly just not a checklist, but a mindset, is that idea that over time, I can, see the improvements, right? If I'm talking to a client, they may say, hey, I've got a data center that I own. I'm all virtualized, right? I've got all VMware, all Hyper-V infrastructure. I'm seeing those benefits. But ultimately, they still have to pay some of that operational cost, those upgrade costs, that maintenance cost, right? There are those other hidden things that they may not necessarily think about from that perspective. And so it's kind of opening their eyes to what that ultimate TCO is and how you can shift that into the operational model of, okay, you're not paying for the electricity, you're not paying for that, physical security, you're not paying for the maintenance, right? And so you can start see this gradual reduction. And it's, like I said, it's really a yellow brick road. How do I, slowly weave them down further and further into this optimal level of a cost perspective? At times, yes, the cloud cost might spike a little bit. There might be an initial bump, but ultimately you'll see over time that they'll go down. And so it's really just kind of helping them understand that I'm not committing 5 years of expense to anything, right? If 1 month it's this and 1 month it's another thing, that's fine, and you can jettison and do something else. So it provides a lot more flexibility instead of scrapping a bunch of assets.
Perfect. We also have another question here. How does the share nothing architecture compare with an auto scale configuration? Do they work in conjunction?
They can work in conjunction. It can be very expensive to do that, but ultimately, the share nothing architecture means I am not dependent, right? So I don't have a storage account that is serving up multiple things. It's dedicated to one purpose and one purpose only. And so my use case is, hey, I've got product X and my web front end for that product just calls that single database, right? So it's not being shared with something else. So if a lot of people are interested in that resource, I have the ability to auto scale said storage account and keep it being serviced, right? So they do work hand in hand. But ultimately, if product Y starts having a similar spike, right, I'm not impacting its performance because product X is. So they can work in conjunction, but obviously from a cost perspective, it can be very high to implement both of those mentalities.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have any other questions that they would like to pop in the comments? I think that's it. But that was such a great session. Thank you so much, Derek. I think everyone's definitely learned a bit more about cost optimization. And thank you so much for providing us with our last live session of the day. I think that was a great way to wrap up the day. I think we might want to add Hugo back in. I think he wants to talk a little bit about a wrap-up session that we will have.
Sure.
Hi, guys. And Derek, thank you so much to be part of these events. And I take the opportunity to thank all the speakers, actually, because they delivered today great sessions. And you are part of the team and you make these events happen, you know? So thank you so much, all of you. And I would like to share with you a quick instruction about the wrap-up. So essentially, as you know, on the schedule, we have on the schedule now the wrap-up session, and we have a few announcements to make, important announcements to make in relation to the Ideathon Day on 24th of October. But we changed a little bit the model. So we are planning to do the wrap-up session using Microsoft Teams, and we want to welcome everyone watching these live events to join us, so you can connect with the Cloud Lunch and Learn team and speakers. And also we have the opportunity to take a photo all together, okay, using Teams. So I just want to share the screen with you. So on the sites, okay, so the event page, let me just put the banner here. Do we have a banner? Yes, I think. So on the event page, you should be able to find on the schedule section the link to the Microsoft Teams. So we should start shortly. We are just going to have a quick break, and we hope to see you there, and you can join us and listen to the wrap-up and the announcements, okay? And once again, Derek, thank you so much. And you are, of course, welcome to join us as well, so we can take a group photo and close this amazing day and events.
Thank you.
Thank you.